the 8th of July. They plan to hold this rally in Canada, the United States, Australia and the UK, with Khalistani sympathizers marching to Indian missions in these countries. What's worse, these groups have painted a target on the back of India's ambassadors, high commissioners and consuls general by putting up posters that call them killers and bear the names and pictures of India's top diplomats in these countries. A clear incitement to violence against Indian diplomats. The one country that is seen as being the softest on Khalistanis, and with good reason, is Canada. On Thursday, there was a war of words between India and the Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau over this issue. Trudeau claimed that Canada has always taken serious action against terrorism and will continue to do so, adding it is wrong to believe that his government is soft on Khalistan supporters and terrorists in the country. India reacted sharply, with the Ministry of External Affairs spokesperson saying the issue is not about freedom of expression, but its misuse for advocating violence, propagating separatism and legitimizing terrorism. Trudeau's remarks came days after India summoned the Canadian envoy to New Delhi and issued a démarche over the increasing activities by pro-Khalistani elements in Canada. The rally and the objectionable posters haven't been the only provocations from Canadian authorities. Recently, they even allowed a parade float in the Greater Toronto area that depicted former Prime Minister Indira Gandhi's assassination. Khalistan supporters, marking the 39th anniversary of Operation Blue Star, put up a tableau of the late Prime Minister with blood on her clothes and a poster that read, "Revenge of Attack on Shri Darbar Sahib." In the past, there has been a so-called Khalistan referendum in Canada. For now, Canada has assured India of the safety of its diplomats. This after External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar said India had asked its partner countries such as Canada, Australia, the UK and the US not to give space to extremist Khalistani ideology, as it is not good for relations. In fact, acknowledging that the issue has impact bilateral ties in many ways, Jaishankar said, how Canada has dealt with the Khalistan issue is a long-standing issue. Very frankly, they seem to be driven by vote bank politics, responses constrained by what they regard as vote bank compulsions. Today, India's National Security Advisor Ajit Doval asked his UK counterpart to take strong public action, such as deportation against extremist elements threatening officers of the Indian High Commission in the UK. Just last weekend, there were shocking scenes at the Indian consulate in San Francisco in the United States, which was targeted for a second time in less than 3 months. A part of the building was set on fire as revenge for the killing of Khalistani leader Hardeep Singh Nijjar in Canada last month. The question is just how serious is the latest Khalistani threat to India and its interests abroad, and what more can New Delhi do to pressurize other countries to crack down on these secessionist elements and their nefarious activities?
The Canada one specifically, because I think there was reports of that's where it started off. There is a rally on the so-called rally on the 8th. First and foremost, there are two separate elements. You would have seen posters inciting violence against Indian diplomats. I think, Manas, you were referring to that. What do we do? What is our overall sense? Look, our sense is that these posters inciting violence against our diplomats and our diplomatic premises are abroad are unacceptable, and we condemn them in the strongest terms. With respect to Canada, the matter has been strongly taken up with the Canadian authorities, both in New Delhi and in Ottawa. We have called on the Government of Canada to take all steps to ensure the safety of our diplomats and security of our diplomatic missions in Canada. It is a matter of concern that freedom of expression and speech is once again being misused by anti-India elements based in Canada and elsewhere. And we continue to press the Canadian side to ensure that our diplomats can carry out their normal functions without fear or intimidation. We have seen some comments, at least the media reports about comments by Prime Minister Trudeau. But let me make the larger point that the issue is not about freedom of expression, but its misuse for advocating violence, for propagating separatism, and for legitimizing terrorism. So that's actually what we would like to emphasize. We have also had instances or situations where these kind of threats have also taken place, be the US, Australia, and the UK, to name a few. You would have seen External Affairs Minister himself mention in the context of, I think, Prime Minister Trudeau's comments, that External Affairs Minister strongly believes that countries should not pander to vote bank politics. We have seen comments by UK Foreign Secretary. I think that comment somebody asked specifically about UK. As you are aware, we've had problems with the security of our mission in London. We have taken up this latest issue of threats against our diplomats with the UK authorities. We have noted these comments by UK Foreign Secretary, but we would naturally judge them by what happens on the ground. In the name of freedom of expression, we should not be giving space to those who advocate violence or, as I said, propagate separatism or legitimize terrorism.
हमारे जो पार्टनर देश जो हैं, जैसे कनाडा है, अमेरिका है, यूके है, ऑस्ट्रेलिया है, जहां कभी-कभी खालिस्तानी एक्टिविटीज होती हैं, हमने उनको रिक्वेस्ट की है कि वो उनको खालिस्तानियों को स्पेस न दें, क्योंकि उनकी सोच जो है ये रेडिकल एक्सट्रीमिस्ट विचारधारा जो है वो ना हमारे लिए अच्छा है, ना उनके लिए है, ना हमारे रिश्तों के लिए है। तो ये जो पोस्टर का विषय ये हम जरूर उन सरकारों से उठाएंगे। हो सकता है कि हम अभी तक, क्योंकि ये कल परसों ही निकला था, हो सकता है कि अभी तक हो भी।
All right. Joining me to discuss this issue now is former diplomat Ambassador R.P. Kaushik, also with us, foreign affairs expert Pramit Pal Singh. Thank you so much to both of you for joining us. Ambassador Kaushik, if I could start with you. Now, even though Sikh for Justice and other pro-Khalistan groups have threatened to hold this rally in Canada, the UK, the US and Australia tomorrow on the 8th of July, it is Canada that has really come in for most criticism for the manner in which it has dealt with these elements. And now, India's External Affairs Minister is on record as saying that it seems like the Canadian government, the Justin Trudeau government, is essentially pandering to these secessionist and anti-India elements for the sake of vote bank politics. Now, Justin Trudeau can deny all he wants these claims and say that his government takes serious action against these elements and against terrorism. And yes, the Canadian Foreign Minister too has assured India that India's diplomats in that country are safe. But the question really is, for how long can Justin Trudeau and his government continue to look the other way and pander to these elements, knowing fully well that these elements are inimical to India and its interests? Particularly if you look at the posters that have come out ahead of this rally, they clearly paint a target on the back of India's top diplomats. This is an incitement to violence. Clearly, this is a very serious issue for us.
Yeah, as you know, that it has been abundantly clear that as far as Canada is concerned, there is a very heavy concentration of the Sikh community there for a very long time. Historically, they have been fairly active in their politics of Canada. And quite a few people, in fact, I would say even the defense minister in Canada was from the Sikh community. So you can imagine how much of power and how much of good deal of, conversing and good deal of things of one nature or the other have been at their disposal. And Trudeau has tried to some extent, I should be very fair in my comments as far as the Prime Minister of Canada is concerned. But there are certain things which are beyond their control. They don't think that this is such a serious matter for them. They think this is a demonstration, it's a rally, and this will disappear, and nothing substantive comes out of it. That is one thing. But as far as the America is concerned, there, I have some experience of having studied the diaspora, Indian diaspora in the US. And my visit when we were invited by the Asia Society, late 80s, we found that not all Sikh community people who participated in the consulate demonstrations and rallies and of one nature or the other were in such a cohesive manner one group. No. Many of them were in fact induced and affected by some of the leaders there, and they were carried away there, and they were brought there to the consulate to shout slogans. And when I interviewed some of the Sikh community leaders also, they said, well, we have to be very, very cautious as far as the Sikh community is concerned. And they were very angry on the issue of Blue Star, which had taken place. They have not recovered from that kind of a wound, as was inflicted by the so-called Government of India, as they said number of times, but it was not such a cohesive group. A couple of them were more active, the rest of them were slogan shouting. I think if it is proper for me to say, America being a federal state in absolute sense of the term, and not all states are governed by what the federal government would say. There is a certain type of structural difference between India, and there is no such unitary approach that the President of America can completely compel. But of course, he can influence a great deal. But I think what we need is more and more lobby, and more particularly in San Francisco area, where you have the Sikh community largely concentrated in Yuba city. They have a Gurdwara, they have a lot of land, there are very rich farmers, there are all kind of varieties of people who are there. So I would imagine that as far as Sikh community goes, let me not put it that it is a completely united in the form. Some of them have been just dragged for the demonstration and rallies, etc., as far as I can understand.
So to be fair, nobody really is painting the Sikh community with a black brush. We're only talking about these specific elements who continue to fuel sentiments of secessionism and engage in anti-India activities. I think we need to be very clear about that distinction. But Pramit Pal Chaudhary, let me come to you. Now, you heard the MEA spokesperson Arindam Bagchi give a rather strong response to Justin Trudeau when he said this issue is not about freedom of expression. It's about its misuse for advocating violence, propagating separatism and legitimizing terrorism. Now, when Justin Trudeau, the Prime Minister of Canada, says India is wrong, Canada has always taken extremely seriously violence and threats of violence, we've always taken serious action against terrorism, and we always will. But frankly, who will take Justin Trudeau seriously, given the fact that not only do you have this rally that's coming up tomorrow? There are these posters that are clearly inciting violence against India's top diplomats in that country. In the not so distant past, you've had a so-called Khalistan referendum being allowed on Canadian soil. Just a few weeks ago, there was a parade allowed in the Brampton city of Canada that included a float which practically celebrated the assassination of Indira Gandhi, calling it revenge for Operation Blue Star. You know, when you look at all those facts before us, do you really believe that Canada and the Trudeau government are serious about cracking down on Khalistanis?
Yeah, well, I think the argument that they make is that basically, while these are all unfortunate, none of them actually result in violence. These are therefore under the freedom of speech. Incitement, the real issue is always, does incitement to violence therefore come under freedom of speech, or is it considered a precursor to violence and therefore requires preemptive action? That's always been the real difficult element. I think, though, the real problem with the Trudeau government and the real evidence of their lack of understanding, should we say, of the threat that the Khalistanis pose, was that we had a counterterrorism agreement, an intelligence agreement signed with his predecessor, Steve Harper, the Conservative government before that. And when he came to power, he basically threw that away. He said, I'm not going to be part of this. So in effect, he ensured that India would not receive the kind of intelligence that India felt it needed to get a sense of the degree of the Khalistani threat. In other words, we are prepared to allow Khalistan. We accept that some Khalistanis are rather just noise, but we have to have intelligence to be able to distinguish between those who are dangerous and those who are just noisemakers. But by ripping up that intelligence agreement, that intelligence sharing agreement, Trudeau ensured that India could not distinguish between one and the other. More importantly, as far as we can tell, Canada cannot distinguish now between one and the other. That's the point of intelligence. And that is the whole idea of counterterrorism, counterintelligence in these issues. So in effect, he ensured that Canada didn't have the capacity to distinguish one or the other. We have seen a very clear escalation, as you mentioned, of Khalistani activity. We saw that in the farmers' protests in India. We've seen this in the attacks on the diplomatic missions in India. And now we see open threats against, like, for example, the Indian ambassador to the United States. Very clearly, the Khalistanis are on a very different track right now. We've also seen 3 Khalistani leaders dying recently, which may be an indication of intra-Khalistani violence breaking out, that the Khalistanis are fighting among themselves, which itself is often a precursor to further radicalization. So these are all clear markers that something is going wrong with the Khalistani movement. And the Indian argument is very straightforward. The Khalistani movement in India has almost no support. It is literally a minor fringe group. It is its overseas supporters who themselves will not face the problems or the violence that would follow from an actual Khalistani resurrection in India, who are the problem. And so therefore, US, Canada, and Britain in particular, though there are other countries where there are smaller groups, need to be taking this very seriously. And quite rightly, as was mentioned by the ambassador, a lot of these countries didn't take this seriously. And I think what's good now about what is happening is we're starting to see Britain and I think increasingly the United States, especially after these direct threats to the US ambassador, to the Indian ambassador to the US, will start to take threats. Canada remains the problem, and Canada has to be able to distinguish between what is real and what is noise. And right now, I don't think they have that capacity to do so or the political will to do so.
You know, I think you're quite right in pointing out that Canada really seems to be the primary problem here. But before I go back to the ambassador, Pramitpal Chaudhary, I want to ask you a couple of questions. You know, if these countries, the United States and the UK in particular, are indeed serious about tackling the threat that has been issued to India's top diplomats in these countries, then, you know, should they not be doing more than just, let's say, beefing up security at India's missions? For example, we've not heard anything about the possible cancellation of these rallies. I know that it all comes down once again to this debate over freedom of expression. We are vibrant democracies. We allow space for dissent. But, you know, if there is incitement to violence and if threats are being issued to India's diplomats, then surely the freedom of expression argument doesn't really hold. What do you think these countries really need to do in view of the threats that are being issued ahead of tomorrow's rally? And also, how serious do you believe is this larger Khalistani threat to India? As you said, it may not have much support at home, but these elements certainly have reared their head abroad in recent months.
See, for a lot of these countries, even if I'm, let's say, the FBI, and I'm told, go after these Khalistanis and see what you can do. Are they a problem? If not, take them out. Your problem will be that you can probably only arrest them and take them before a judge. And the judge in America or Canada and Britain will say, what evidence do you have that these were doing more than just making noise? If they were just yelling and shouting, then there's no case here. Most judges will just say, you don't have a case. Because the law is very clear. You have to have something that points to them actually prepared to carry out an act of violence. I would guess right now, given what we've seen and what is happening, that there are probably right now investigations taking place. And the heart of it is to try to find some kind of evidence, not necessarily of violence. What you often do in the intelligence structure when you're doing counterterrorism is you say, okay, these 5 men are the danger points, who may be potentially, they're on the watch list, But how do we ensure that they don't become a problem? We dig around into their past and we find out something else that's wrong with them. Let's say they haven't filed their income tax properly. They have done some other business deal that had a degree of financial fraud. And then we arrest them for that. And then that slowly rolls up that team. It's like, the old FBI thing where they took out was it Al Capone, the mafia don of Chicago. They took him out on his income tax.
Taxes, absolutely.
Right? Because they couldn't find enough evidence on the other side. People were too scared to testify against him. So they said, oh, you haven't paid your taxes, you're in jail. And I think that's what we'll see, something like that happening over the next year or so.
Well, perhaps these governments need to repeat an Al Capone here if they are to ensure the safety of Indian diplomats. But on a more serious note, Ambassador Kaushik, let me ask you this. Is the problem with the intent of these governments, or does the problem lie with the law, as Pramit Pal Chaudhary just pointed out? Because these countries have often argued that, look, we are robust, vibrant democracies. We allow space for peaceful protests and dissent. We cannot come down hard on these people unless there has actually been an incident of violence. As an ambassador, what is your take on that? Do you think that, this in a sense ties the hands of the authorities and, therefore India repeatedly taking up this issue with these foreign governments is not helping on that count? Also, what explains, according to you, the revival of the Khalistan movement that we've seen in recent times, not at home, but certainly abroad? What explains it, according to you?
No, as far as I can see, that there are a lot of hostile elements which are placed against India in some of these countries. That is one way. The lobby is very strong against India in certain cases. China, of course, has of late become more and more hostile and poised in the direction in which some of the terrorists are doing their activity. There is no doubt about it that we need to take very stern steps in controlling this kind of a menace, mostly in foreign countries. And we have to persuade and we have to induce the government of these respective countries to control such activities, to prevent such kind of spread of activities which is taking place in England, UK, that is in US and other places also. And we have to work out our own lobby in doing so. It is not so simple as to simply government to government kind of a situation goes, but you have to have a very strong lobby to prevent any such activity, but that has a very limited scope. You cannot possibly go beyond a certain stage. I would imagine that the Indian association in the US and Indian associations elsewhere can play a very effective role in controlling, in spreading the correct news and telling the people that this is something wrong. Many of them are convinced that it is wrong, but they don't pay any attention. They are indifferent, callous, not particularly worried about what is happening, and they take care of themselves. And unlike India, where some of these news or some of these activities are demonstrated in a very different way, these things don't catch the eye of so many people in the US, including the Indian community. When I was talking to some of the friends in America, and I said, look, why don't you people play some positive role in that? And they said, look, Doc, we have come here to improve upon our health, financial health. We have not come here to talk about India. Now, you can imagine this kind of an indifferent attitude on the part of some people, of course, not all. And it's a very mixed situation. I would imagine that you have to have a well-planned strategy, very well-planned strategy from the government, from certain associations, from certain other organizations, India-friendly, to stem such a tide of this anti-India activity taking place by the Khalistanis. And it's not so difficult as one can imagine. If we have to deploy our resources in a positive fashion, in a fruitful manner, I think we can succeed a great deal. And I can tell you that not many of them are so active. Many of them are just carried away by a certain type of campaign, by a certain kind of persuasion, and by certain types of threat. Sometimes they were even intimidating some of these community people who told me that they will reveal that you are one of the illegal immigrants to the United States. So they would gang up and then they will all come. And I remember Ganga Singh Dhillon at one time when we were all there, that is Kabir Bedi, myself, former Foreign Secretary Rashootra Sahib, and Ravi from the Hindu, who were all participating in this kind of Asia Society meeting. And many of them confessed that we have been persuaded and we have been intimidated and we have been coerced and we have been brought here, much against our wishes. But what can we do? Sometimes even the collection of the money is taking place under such kind of intimidation. So these are various nuances of this anti-India activity done by the Khalistanis. And you know it very well that ISIS is very active on all fronts, coupled with the Chinese resources available to them. Certain other hostile elements are also there, which are taking a good deal of interest in preventing India from coming on to that kind of a position.
Yes.
We had purposely suggested to one Dr. Marva, who had become a dentist in 1930,
right,
and he had invited us there. And we faced Ganga Singh Dhillon, who was the strong militant leader at that time. And we talked and we asked him. And he said, no, we will not leave them. This is what we will do. That's what, some kind of an obstinacy and all kind of things were taking place.
There is no doubt that there are plenty of elements that are inimical to India's interests, and some of them have seen a resurrection of sort in recent days. Pramit Chaudhary, final question before we wrap up this discussion. You referred earlier to the deaths of 3 Khalistani sympathizers that have taken place in the last 2 months in Canada, Pakistan and the United Kingdom. And, you know, there were a lot of rumors swirling around over Gurpatwant Singh Pannu, the founder of Sikh for Justice. There were rumors that he may have died in a road accident in the US. He's now surfaced in a video, says, I'm alive and well, and also says he's the one who's behind those provocative posters. Do you believe that this may be a factor that is sort of adding fuel to the fire that we are witnessing ahead of this 8th July rally? And also, once again, talking about Justin Trudeau, it is widely believed that, you know, these Khalistani elements and secessionists do in fact constitute a significant vote bank for Justin Trudeau and his party, and that some of these elements actually are part of the government. Now, is that really the real problem in Canada? How political do you think it really is, going beyond just the compulsions of following the law?
So on the first part about the question of the deaths of the Khalistani sympathizers and leaders, yes, I suspect we'll find out that this was one of the reasons that they have come to life. Often these type of internal battles results in, should we say, a degree of radicalization where one faction or basically attacks the other for being too soft or being too weak, and forces the others to start moving in a certain direction, in this case, clearly more agitation and potentially more violence. And the more violent one, obviously, then takes the lead. So we'll see what the background to that is. See, of the 3 countries we mentioned, President Biden may get Sikh votes, but the Sikhs are too small a community in America to be politically very important. They have localized support in little parts of California and New Mexico and so on, but otherwise they're not a national political force, simply because of the size of the United States. In Britain, the Tory party is in power. They don't normally get Sikh support anyway, so they, Rishi Sunak and so on, don't care about this. For them, this is would become an issue more about foreign policy and security policy. In Canada, however, Trudeau, his party gets the bulk of Sikh votes. And Indian community, Canada is a reasonably small country in terms of population. The Sikh community is very large. Indian migration to Canada, by Canada Census's own figures, Indians will be the single largest ethnic minority in the country by 2030, and a sizable portion, I would estimate maybe half, will be Punjabis and Sikhs. So they are at an actual political force, and in some states like British Columbia, they are genuinely one of the largest vote banks in the state. So those are areas that make Trudeau, and Trudeau right now has been sinking in the polls for a while. He barely won his last re-election. For him, a lot of pressure has to be applied on him. He will be very reluctant to take up cudgels against the Khalistanis.
And that reluctance is quite evident, in fact, which is why it's hard to take his claims seriously and at face value. But let's certainly hope that even if this rally does go ahead, there is no harm caused to any of our diplomats abroad, and that these governments ensure the safety of India's diplomats as well as their families. On that note, Ambassador R.P. Kaushik and Pramit Pal Chaudhary, thank you so much for joining us on Global Lens. Well, time for us to take a quick break here on the show. Don't go anywhere. There is more on the other side.
Pakistan is actually genociding Baloch people. So being Baloch is a crime. If you are a Baloch, it means in the eyes of Pakistan, you don't have any right to live.
The Chinese and Pakistanis are colonizing the Baloch and exploiting their resources.
Baloch armed struggle will continue unless China withdraws, Pakistan military withdraws from Balochistan and give Baloch complete